Good afternoon. Uh, I'd like to say a few words on the situation with bookmaking in New South Wales in Australia, because I do know I have correspondence and I know I speak to bookmakers in England. It is the situation here is so unfair. Not only unfair, it is completely wrong. The people who are in charge of this game, which is going completely down the gurgler, as we all know, completely down the gurgler, they don't understand the most important thing about horse racing or gambling on horses, trots and dogs, and that is the gambling side of it, betting. Now, we had the best situation in the world. The gambling in Australia after the war, the 60s and the 70s, was the biggest in the world. Full stop. That's a fact. It's a privilege to have a bookmaker's license. How it worked, how it did work, and how it still works now is in New South Wales, if it didn't matter what part of New South Wales you lived in, it's a big state. Back in days gone by, there were different racing associations. Take around the Grafton area, for example, it was the Northern Rivers Racing Association, and we had the Western Districts, and of course the city, and so forth and so forth. If you wanted to take out a bookmaker's license, of course, you had to go first of all to the bookmakers co-op and be guaranteed. Show the bookmakers credentials officers your financial situation, and not only that, you had to be a person who, going back in years gone by, of course, even the bookmakers co-op, who didn't have the final say, they suggested that you have some experience as a bookmaker's clerk before you take out a license, or be at least a punter for a while, and know exactly how the game works. Just digressing, I remember, for instance, a chap who's no longer with us. He was a very wealthy man. He owned horses. He was a huge punter. Lionel Abrahams, as I say, poor Lionel's not with us anymore, unfortunately, because he was not only he was a great, not only a good man, but he was an asset to the racing game. Lionel applied to, of course, to take out a bookmaker's license in the early 80s, and to the AJC, and they said, oh, well, and he knew all the committeemen and so forth. Oh, well, Lionel, yes, well, you just can't come in here and start off in the legend. You should go and get some experience at the outer tracks and see how you go before you give it a go. Here, this is a tough game. Lionel, well, he said, no, I'm not going out to betting pennies out there and those tracks and getting. I want to go. No, so well, you can't, Lionel. It's as simple as that. Anyway, going back to the situation, as I say, you apply to You got guaranteed by the Bookmakers Co-op. And then you, well, of course, the ultimate goal, it didn't matter whether you were a country bookmaker in anywhere in the state, and there were plenty of bookmakers who used to work out, well, for instance, Mo Conlon, who's still working now. He came from Parkes, Mo. There was Alan Barry, who came from Orange, and there were bookies from way up, whoop and down south. Their ultimate goal, if you took out a bookmaker's license, if you didn't want to leave the country, well, you stayed in the country and worked. But if you wanted to, you had a passion to be a bookmaker and become a big bookmaker, big gambling bookmaker, your ultimate goal was to be on the rails at Randwick. That was your ultimate goal. And of course, we'll forget about the country bookmakers at the moment, but I happen to be, I'm very, very lucky. I'm privileged to have seen how big the gambling was. I did work for Bill Waterhouse, the biggest bookmaker the world has ever seen. And Bill is, well, not only was he the biggest bookmaker, and by the way, Bill won't admit he was the biggest bookmaker, but he said, look, he said to me on tour on different occasions, Gary, he said, I don't want to be the biggest bookie. He said, I just want to be the richest. Bill's got a very good sense of humour, but he was, as I said, the biggest bookie. But I worked for Bill, and he was a great mentor to me. Bill was he was a lot better bookie than he actually thought. He was in a well, that's another story, in a situation where it was very difficult towards the end for him to operate the style that he wanted to, and that was take on the world. But anyway, even Bill Waterhouse, the biggest bookmaker the world's ever seen, when he took out his license, guaranteed by the Bookmakers Co-op, well, of course, back in those days, there was the flat at Randwick. Do you think Bill could just walk into the flat at Randwick? We don't care who you are. No, you go out there. Bill had to start off. He worked at the Dogs and, of course, Trots and provincial horse meetings. And he finally got into the Ledger, the flat, I should say, at Randwick. No, what am I talking about? Before he got into the flat at Randwick, back in those days, the AJC, they had 4 courses under their banner, and that was Randwick and Warwick Farm, their number 1 courses, and they had their number 2 courses were Hawkesbury and Kembla Grange. So after working, you couldn't start off at Kembla Grange and Hawkesbury. You had to go to Gosford and Wyong and other country meetings, and as I say, the Dogs and the Trots. And you couldn't get into Wentworth Park or Harold Park straight away. You had to go to Wollongong, or you had to go to Gosford, Bulli, Dapto. Richmond, of course, started years and years later. But to get even into the city dog meetings, you couldn't get into them. You couldn't put your name. There was a waiting list to get into the Ledger at Harold Park and Wentworth Park. So anyway, of course, he eventually did, and we know the story. He became there, standing in the middle of the rails, and took on all comers. I not only was privileged to work for Bill, I remember back, I cut my teeth going to Richmond Dogs of a Saturday afternoon. Not that I wasn't involved in racing prior to that, because my grandfather was a bookmaker. My father was a bookmaker. He was a bricklayer, my father, but he also had a bookmaker's license. So I was firmly entrenched in my family, the racing game. And where I worked yesterday at Hawkesbury, I remember the rails at Hawkesbury where I worked yesterday hasn't changed in 100 years. It's still in exactly the same place. Where the enclosure, where the horses walk around, is exactly where it used to be 100 years ago. I remember collecting tickets, picking up bookies' tickets out in the front, all the clean ones that weren't torn up, of course, out on the front lawn there when I was a very, very young boy, like I'm well under 10. When my parents used to take me there. Anyway, in the holidays, of course. And I started working, as I say, cut my teeth going to Richmond Dogs. Used to hitchhike over there of a Saturday afternoon. I lived at Penrith, and I met a bookmaker there called Terry Page, who became, after Bill at one stage got a bit of a holiday, had a little holiday. Terry became a very big bookmaker, but he was working on Saturday afternoon betting on the Dogs at Richmond up the straight, and there were about 30 plus bookmakers working on the interstate on the Dogs of a Saturday afternoon at Richmond, and there was another ring where there were bookies betting on Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. Only one bookie betting on Brisbane, and about another half a dozen at the most, 5 or 6 only, bookies betting on Sydney and Melbourne. That was the next progression. If you were a bookie at those Dogs, you would love to have got into that away ring at the Dogs of the Saturday afternoon. And that's what happened to Terry Page around about the same time as a bookmaker called Bill McKelvey, who was a huge bookmaker. Bill passed away way before his time, unfortunately. And also another bookmaker called Bobby Bland, who was became a huge bookmaker in Sydney, betting mostly on when he got into the city, he was working on the locals, but then when he got in later in life, he became a robot bookmaker betting on the interstate, where the prices used to come across, of course, in those days over the loudspeaker. Anyway, now, ladies and gentlemen, the changes in Melbourne, race 1. Number 2 is now 6-4, good, and so forth. And everyone used to change their boards, and all the punters would look. Well, anyway, as I say, even Terry, he went from working there, and McKelvey and Bland, they got into that interstate ring, and then that away ring, and then, of course, even up at Richmond Dogs of a Saturday afternoon, did you know that there were committeemen every now and again from the AJC even? Oh, well, one of them every now and again. So there's bookies up there. Well, they'd get in the car and after they go up, they'd observe, because they knew. They were very, very clever, because to keep the game going, they relied on bookmakers. Bookmakers' turnover tax. In those days, we're still paying that much tax. Is not funny, but of course, back in those days, we were paying 1% to the Treasury and 1% to the club. Plus, you had to pay, when you're working at the country meetings, your tickets cost you a penny and then a cent. And then, of course, and they were tuppence before decimal currency came in, and then 2 cents for your tickets when you worked in the city. Bookmakers, as they still are today, bookmakers' expenses are a very well. Bookies say, "Geez whiz, when I die, if I would have finished with all the expenses I paid over the years, I would be able to leave a lot of money to my family." Anyway, that's another story. But Terry, and Bland and McKelvey, after getting out of Hawkesbury, out of Richmond, as I say, they started working at the provincial horse meetings, Gosford and Wyong, and then they eventually got into the AJC's number 2 licences, Hawkesbury and Kembla. As I say, I worked at Hawkesbury yesterday, and I remember when Terry was working right over in the back corner. There were about 35 plus bookmakers in the outside ring at Hawkesbury, the likes of Bill Waterhouse and all of the city bookmakers, Lenny Burke and the Tid Marshes, and oh, you've got no idea. all working on the rails at Hawkesbury, and exactly the same position where we are, but except that there was no one in the outside ring there yesterday. There was a fun fair selling wine and cakes. Anyway, Terry got into, as McKelvey, they got into Kembla and Hawkesbury. Terry finished up working his way onto the rails at Hawkesbury after bookies. Every time he started betting really big, which I had something to do with it, because I used to make sure I kept him up with the right market, the right market in the marketplace. And even though Terry was a good bookie, but I think I was a bit of an asset to him. And he got, like the other two, onto the rails at Hawkesbury and Kembla. But they still couldn't get into the flat at Randwick. But then, next thing you know, the new season came about, and there were bookmakers who were retiring in the paddock, who were retiring in the paddock, whether they be on the rails or the outside ring or in the silver rings. There are 2 or 3 silver rings at Randwick, or bookmakers who were retiring in the ledger, who never ever made it to the paddock, and even bookies who were in the flat who were retiring. They couldn't even make it into the ledger. And as I say, bookmakers, and there was the new season came along, and there was the opening for people to move along the train and get a position. Well, Terry got into the flat, like McKelvey and Bland, into the flat at Randwick, and then and progressed. Terry became, as I say, one of the biggest bookmakers in Sydney for a little while, and you progressed. While they were progressing, the committee, as I said, like, they, believe it or not, they even went to Richmond Dogs to observe, but they also went to the country meetings when all the carnivals were on at Grafton and Wagga and Albury and so forth. But they also used to go to their Hawkesbury and Kembla and to the other provincial. They'd observe the bookmakers who were coming through. And they weren't fools. A lot of them were betting men themselves. They used to say, "Oh, that bookie there, yes, now he's got a good eye. He's got a good idea of it. He might be the biggest holder, but he's a survivor, that bloke." Believe it or not, bookmakers used to write bets in their ledgers to boost up their hold, to impress committeemen and so forth. And clubs say, "Well, this bloke's holding a lot of money. He deserves to go up the rung." And some bookmakers did that. Not many of those bookies survived, the funny thing. But anyway, the true survivor, they were observed by the committeemen, and they said, "Oh yes, well, that bloke, he in this tough game, even though people think bookies just win, we know that's not the case, because we know how many licenses we tear up a year, and there's plenty of bookies to take them, and all these bookies who are taking out licenses think it's a license to steal." Well, it's not, and especially today. It's just the toughest game of all time. That's why nobody. It's as simple as that. That's why today nobody takes out a license, because it's as simple as this. You can't, they just run out of section straight away. You can't survive in it. So anyway, what happens? The committeemen, they observe those bookmakers who they think are going to survive and eventually get into that paddock at Randwick. And they want those strong bookies to be there for the simple reason they want to keep that marketplace so vibrant, and also get the turnover, keep on getting that turnover. The bigger the better, because the more the bookies hold, the more the captains hold. What do? They give the clubs more section. And they've got to give the section away for prize money and keep the joint going and so forth and so forth. And that's what happened, and everyone was happy, and they had a shite house full of section. So what did they do with the bookies who they didn't think had the ability? Well, there were plenty of bookies who didn't have the ability to become, of course, the biggest bookies on the track, even to not only to progress to get onto the rails of Randwick, But there were bookies, unfortunately, who died in the ledger and in the flat, believe it or not, that never, ever made it out of it because they either went broke or they just didn't have the ability to. They bet in nickels and dimes, and they just said, well, the committee were sensible, as I say. They said, well, if we let these bookies eventually just keep on going, even though they've been there a long time, but when they get in the punt, they're not going to be, not only to the punters, but they're not going to be any advantage to us as well. They're fleas, unfortunately, and you know, so they weeded those bookies out. Could you imagine? I'll get to that. Well, what the situation is today. There's a, you know, could you imagine well, look, my 3 daughters all worked for me at one stage at the track. I'm so proud of all of them, and my son Dan. Dan, I steered away from the races. Not 2 of my daughters are still involved in racing. One and the other, well, 3 of them are still involved in racing. But nothing against females racing in years gone by. As we know, Gay Waterhouse became the leading trainer in Sydney, a female. We have female bookmakers now, women in all different parts of society and the workforce right throughout the world, prime ministers and so forth. Of course, so nothing against females when I say this, but could you imagine back in those days, which is not that long ago, even when, you know, when Lionel applied for a license, it's not so long ago, a woman coming along, oh, hello, look, my name's, I've been, look, there's my guarantee from the Bookmakers Co-op. You know my father, he's the vice chairman of the Bookmakers Co-op, and I've been a bookies clerk. I know how to press the buttons on the machine, and I even know how to write the books in the ledger. And I know how to, when someone has $6 to 4, I know how to write 10 on the ticket. And if the horse's name is Farlap, I know how to put PH, PLH or something on the ticket. Oh yeah. Oh, do you really? Yes. Now look, I'd like to take out put a stand inside in your members' stand, in where your members are, and bet on your horse racing, if that was all right. Excuse me, lady. What are you actually talking about? Well, can I look? I'll tell you what you should do. Now you go first of all down to you drive out to Lithgow Dogs of a Saturday after. That's where Robbie Waterhouse. That's where Bill's son, Robbie Waterhouse, one of the biggest bookmakers in Australia now. He worked at Lithgow Dogs of a Saturday afternoon. He couldn't get into Wentworth Park or Harold Park ledger. He got in his car. He worked out. The first meeting he ever worked, Robbie, was at the provincial meeting on a Saturday afternoon in the outside ring at Newcastle. He couldn't get into the flat or the ledger at Randwick. He worked at dog meeting. He couldn't get into Harold Park or Wentworth Park Dogs of the ledger. He drove out. He worked at when Newcastle wasn't on a Saturday afternoon, Lithgow Dogs of a Saturday night. Now they would have said to this lady, she's got this woman I'm talking about, and plus others, I'll get to them. They happen to have a stand in the members at Randwick. Never worked at a race meeting as a bookmaker anywhere in or on the planet, let alone New South Wales. Look, lady, you better. Oh yes, well that's lovely. We'll love to see you here in years to come. But first of all, you've got to prove yourself to us. We can't put you in front of bookmakers here. There are bookmakers who, in the country, out not only into provincial meetings here, but there are bookmakers out here in the districts, in the Western District and so forth, who bet in telephone numbers. I think they'd like that. They've been bookmakers for years and years and years and years. I think they'd like to come down here and have a stand in the member stand here, betting our members, and not even betting them the right odds, betting them the average odds, the printer prices. What are you talking about? Go away, you fool. You can't have a license. You can't step in here. Oh, is that the case? Yes, now go away. Well, of course, you know, can you imagine this, like there's this person I'm talking about, this person's actually got that stand in Randwick at the moment, but the club say, oh, nobody else wanted it, so we thought we'd go to the first person who came along, give them a bit of it. If it wasn't a political appointment, let's be fair dinkum. That's what it was, as simple as that. It was just a handover, like it was a political appointment, like the other robots who have these stands today. They're political appointments. They go crying pole mouth. The bookmakers who are, and one of them, he worked yesterday at Hawkesbury. It's an absolute joke. It's the only meeting he works outside the city meetings. Committeemen and all other people involved come and observe the situation. He happens to have a stand in the members at Hawkesbury. That's the only reason he goes there. Now, it is an insult to the game. The market goes up. This was yesterday. The market goes up, and it's like every meeting at Hawkesbury. The market goes up, and once it appears on the screen, the teleprinter screen, they set their board. When I say they, his clerks do, because he's walking around, he's over in the cafeteria reading a book or the papers or something. He starts set his board to 2 or 3 rolls under whatever the teleprinter is. And he's one of these bookmakers who holds an absolute shite house full of section every Saturday in these member stands. Now, the bookies say, the committee, these geniuses on the committee who appoint these stands, they say, well, he holds a lot more than you. I say, oh, does he really? Oh, yes, look how much, look, he holds 10, 20 times as much money as you. He's a bigger bookie than you. I say, oh, is he really? I'll tell you what, bring him down here in the marketplace and put him next to me next week, or put him in the middle of the rails if you want. He's in the section he holds, and some of these other captains who hold a lot more than I do. I'm wanting to bet. I want to bet big. I want to bet big and round and win £1 million. But we were there was 18,000 people at Randwick on Saturday. We were in the pub. We were in the pub. This is what happens when I lay a bet of a Saturday afternoon. There's lots of punters there. They come up with the bottle of beer in their hand, or the glass of wine, or the glass of champagne, the flute, and they put it next to the computer. I can't be looking all the time, my clerks, saying, oh, Christ, take it off there, because what happens, it's happened that many times. My daughter on Saturday, some bloke got tripped. He was that drunk. He had a glass of champagne in his hand. It went all down my daughter's neck. It ran down the neck, all down the back of her neck. She was that sticky and uncomfortable for the rest of the day. We're in the pub. The committeemen and these people who know all about racing, they know nothing about racing. They'll say, oh, but they hold more than you. They're bigger than. Bring them down into the marketplace and put them in the middle of the rails if you want. Give them the best stands. Then you'll see what the situation is. These were the ones who the smart committeemen weeded out in years gone by. They didn't want them in the marketplace in their betting ring because they weren't going to turn over any money. Besides one of these, the captain who worked yesterday at Hawkesbury, you've got other captains who are that hold more than me, that are down in the member stands and here and there. And guess what? They, if you put them in the marketplace next to me in the outside ring, wouldn't hold 1/4 of what I hold. Plus, they would throw their hands up in the air and say, I can't stand this. How do you win here? It's impossible. Did you see the figures we bet on Saturday? Go and have a look at my review on Saturday. There were 2 races we bet 100, another one 102, and that you can't lay them all. And every other race, there was one race we bet 90. These blokes, you have given them the prime positions on the course. We're in the pub betting mugs, in a pub with a noise and drink being spilled over you, betting 2-bit dime punters, and also the hardened, most professional and smart, intelligent people in the game, and they're down in your member stand betting your members under the odds what you can actually get in the marketplace at any time of the betting. But you say, well, nobody wanted those stands, and we had to give it to someone. Oh, we went and we advertised, and you shouldn't have done that. You don't do that. If you want 11 agencies at Randwick, you can't have someone who has never had any experience at swinging the satchel anywhere in the world come and give them a stand in the members stand, or let alone other bookmakers who weren't able to survive in the marketplace and were more or less out of the game, and said, well, where look, regardless of what you think, I'm telling you now, and it's a fact, don't ask me, ask them. That'll prove it. Don't believe me, go and ask them. You've got to do it. Go and ask them, you say, and especially your biggest holders, say, listen, is it true what Gary Clark said, plus all the other, here I am, the other bookies there, they won't say it. There's a few of them who'll say it. Now, is it true that if you went down we put you in the middle of the rails, you won't, they say you won't be able to survive. You go, they'll choke. It was a similar, well, he might be right. Let me out of here. You know what would happen if you go and get those bookmakers who are working in those soft positions that nobody else wanted. Nobody else wanted. You're kidding, aren't you? Nobody else wanted. You know, they would retire. Now, it's as simple as that. They would retire, be told. Go and ask them then. Don't believe me. Go and ask them. They would retire because they know they wouldn't have 1,000 to 1 chance to survive in the marketplace. Now, doesn't that tell you something? Don't believe me. Go and ask them. Now, you say they hold more than you. Well, of course they hold. I'm repeating myself here. Of course they hold more than we do, like on Saturday. Go and have a look at their holdings on Saturday. I guarantee they would have. There were bookies there that just they won't bet you their sister is a girl that they held more than me. Now that is not fair. They haven't any ability to survive in the marketplace, but they're in those soft positions. Now it's very simple. Go back to where the smart men in the game knew what the story is before you've got no bookmakers on the race course. And the game will be completely cattle trucked then. I'm telling you now. So do something about it while you can, because there's no bookies taking out licenses. Why isn't that? They used to be queued up. There were waiting lists to get in everywhere, but there's no one even takes out a license anymore because you can't survive. They know they wouldn't be able to survive in the marketplace, betting less than 100 every race. Now, the situation is, I tell you what should happen, and it's as clear as a bell. It's crystal. So there are 11 bookmakers on the rails at the moment in Sydney. You want 11 agencies scattered out of a Saturday, and say a normal Saturday throughout the course. I'll get to these other bookies who don't even work in agency. They're just blow-ins. They're blow-ins 3 and 4 times a year. I'll get to them in a minute. But you must be cracking jokes. This is the situation. It's as crystal clear. All of the bookmakers agree with me. You want, say, 11 positions throughout the marketplace, throughout the track of a Saturday afternoon. Whoever the biggest bookmaker on the rails is, he's the biggest, he turns over, he gives you more turnover tax than any other bookmaker. He should have his first, you show him, you say, now they're the agencies, which one do you want? You're the biggest holder. He said, I'll have that one, thanks. Now, you're go to number 2 holder. You're the next biggest holder. There are the agencies that are left. Which one do you want? I'll have that one, and work your way down to the 11th bookie on the fence. Say a bookmaker on the fence doesn't want one of the agencies. So no, I'm not. Start in the outside ring in the marketplace where there's myself and three other bookmakers, and start offering the biggest holder in the outside ring down to the next one. There's the agencies on the left. Which one do you want? And they go from there. You have got to make you cannot have a bookmaker who has got no input whatsoever in the marketplace working in a soft position, which is a better chance of making any money than we have in the marketplace. Can't you see it is very unfair? Tell you what to do. If you're a committeeman, tell you what you should. The fella on the gate. The fella on the gate. He should come along, tap you on the shoulder, say, listen, you go out here and direct the cars in the car park today. I'm going to get your Rock of Ages for the afternoon, and you take mine. It's a lot harder out here than it is there where you are. But we'll swap and see what the situation. That might be a good example. Take the stewards, of course. The stewards in Sydney do a fantastic job. Whether you be, I've observed not only the head stipe, but the other stewards, right down to cadets. The cadets are chosen, I think, most probably very, very wisely. You have, of course, Terry Griffin in the marketplace all the time when the betting is taking place, who was a bookmaker's clerk at one stage, a very knowledgeable person who can read straight away into situations in the betting ring. If the stipes think there is any corruption taking place, where Terry Griffin goes to while the horse is around the barrier, if he thinks there's any suspicious things happening with the marketplace, they're reported to the stipes, who take special notice of those runners during the race, and so forth. Could you imagine someone, say, coming along and applying for a steward's position, tapping Mr. Murray on the shoulder of Saturday afternoon? Mr. Murray, look, I'm going to go up in the tower here. I'm going to go up in the tower. I haven't got any experience. I've got no experience whatsoever. I've never even been a steward before. But what do? You look through these binoculars, do you? Oh, yes. Yeah, and then you have a look if anyone kisses each other during the race. Oh, you go down there and you go down there and count them as they go past a post or something. I don't know. I'm being a bit silly now, but look, I don't know what the right example is, but surely you can see very, very clearly. And look, where the proof is, very, very simply. Let's stop the fight. Let's stop the fight. As I said before, they are in a position, fancy putting a bookmaker in a position where they can hold more money than we captains in the marketplace, and they haven't got the ability to survive in the main ring. Now, surely to Christ, it must ring home somewhere to you and say, well, you know, we're not going to believe what Clark says. Well, go and ask, as I said before, go and ask them. Go and ask them and see what they've got to say. Telling you now, they'll retire. If you make them say you can't have this cushy, soft, without a doubt, this political appointment we've given you. You can't have this political appointment anymore. The other captains are blowing up because out there in the marketplace is so tough. You've got to be out there in the marketplace with them, not bludging off their prices. Come out and have some input to it. And guess what? Guess what? Survive there and become the biggest bookie. Guess what? You will have, when the end of the season comes along, you're the biggest holder. You've got first preference with an agency. You can have your stand down here in the in the marketplace, and you've got your first preference of an agency. Do I need to say any more? Make them prove themselves. That's how it worked. That's how the smart men in the racing game knew how it was the only way to keep the game surviving, to keep the betting ring vibrant and also strong. But you're giving the ones that they used to weed out, you're giving them the prime positions. And not only you've given them the prime positions, but you're letting them bet that every time they lay a bet, you can get a better price in the marketplace. You don't understand, do you? You don't understand. You can't see it. Whether you're on the committee, what other part of this racing administration you're in, I don't think you get it. Come and tell me where I'm wrong, and I'd love to have a good talk to you. I might say something that I've left out. I think I might have got the point through. Please come and have a talk to me and tell me where I'm wrong. Good afternoon.